So my first question, as you know, I'm doing a piece on storm chasing, and I'd like to explore the psychological motivation behind not just that, but just risking one's life for pleasure. My subject, who's storm chasing, says he does it as a hobby, and that he gets a good adrenaline rush out of it. Like he appreciates the science and all that, but it gives him a good hit in the brain, sort of. Could you describe to me what are some of the personality traits associated with such a person?
Well, I would say that all human beings orient toward novelty, and certainly storm chasing would qualify as a novel experience. However, when novel experiences are well beyond the individual's life experience, then that novel experience could be intimidating. For others, on the other hand, if a novel experience is in the context of their interests, hobbies, and the like, then the individual gravitates toward novelty, almost has a thirst for novelty. Novelty also generates a certain amount of uncertainty. What is it? Can I understand it? Can I master it? And there is a psychology behind novelty seeking, a psychology behind stimulus seeking, a psychology behind sensation seeking, and individuals then find that seeking out novelty provides sensation that is pleasurable, and the experience of mastering the novelty, of understanding it and exploring it, is very, very rewarding, very, very reinforcing. Your comment about this adrenaline rush, an individual in some way can become accustomed to an adrenaline rush, and we all habituate to a certain level of adrenaline rush or stimulus experience. And in that habituation, the novelty wears off. Therefore, we tend to seek out higher and higher levels of novelty. Now, I should mention as well that in conjunction with uncertainty, if the uncertainty is perceived as threatening, then the individual begins to experience anxiety, and we try to escape or avoid anxiety. That's when novelty is no longer novel and sought after, but rather something to be avoided.
Okay, could you explain a bit more about the novelty? Like, does that mean a unique or profound experience, or something else entirely?
Well, as I said, all humans gravitate toward novelty, and they attempt to master it and understand it. Once they achieve understanding, the novelty is no longer novel. Yeah. On the other hand, we can say that people that storm chase, for example, are individuals who are very likely thirsting for stimulation. They're sensation seekers. And there's an interaction between personality and what you might call brain physiology. And certain personalities may be more disposed toward novelty by virtue of the sensations that they might experience cortically in terms of their brain activity. The brain releases various neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters can lead to a sense of pleasure, or they could also lead to a sense of displeasure. Which reminds me of an experiment that had been done several decades ago in which rats had electrodes implanted in selected sites of their brain. Each time they pressed a lever, they would receive an electrical impulse into that site. If the electrical impulse was experienced as pleasurable, the rat would continue over and over to press the lever to the extent that the rat only took out just enough time to have a drink, to have a bite to eat, and then would resume its pressing for that pleasure. So that serves as an analog to what very likely takes place in humans and others that have a mammalian brain, if you like.
Okay. These people who go out to attempt to master the novelty, do they tend to be, like, say, outgoing or impulsive?
Yes, as a matter of fact, for simplicity, I would place such individuals, not exclusively, but a certain percentage of these individuals would qualify as extroverts. individuals that orient toward stimulation. Now, extroverts, as we know, orient toward social stimulation, and they find social interaction delightful and pleasurable, novel, interesting, and they assert themselves quite vigorously. So I would say individuals that very likely storm chase would fall into an extrovert personality category. Now, there's an interesting theory about extroversion and stimulation that such individuals, ironically, have within their systems low levels of stimulation, and they try to compensate for that by seeking out external sources of stimulation. Therefore, they seek out others and they seek out situations which act as a compensation to the lower levels of stimulation, and lower levels of stimulation can be experienced as aversive, as unpleasant. We're constantly trying to adjust the level of sensory experience to a point at which we find satisfactory. If there's too much stimulation, we attempt to lower it. Too little, we attempt to increase it, so that we achieve what might be called a homeostasis, or a state of equilibrium.
Okay. Now, storm chasing is inherently dangerous. I asked my subject about this, and it's actually not so much as the weather, but other things like, say, for instance, you can get into a car accident. That is apparently the #1 cause. And of course, there is the weather. Lightning strikes, while unlikely, they do happen, and you can get pelted by golf ball sized hail. Now, he said that, as long, yes, it is dangerous, but as long as you take the appropriate precautions, then it's perfectly fine. It's actually not as scary as some people might think. So I guess my next question is, how is it that people are able to ignore threats to their own safety for the sake of mastering novelty?
I'm going to retreat back into a theory within developmental psychology. Yeah. It's called the personal fable, and that's a sort of myth that individuals generate about themselves. And adolescents, as we know, are high risk takers. So part of the personal fable is, I'm invulnerable. Bad things happen to other people, but they don't happen to me. In conjunction with the personal fable, the notion of invulnerability is the notion of the imaginary audience. That is, others are looking at me. I imagine they are. So as I construct this imagination, if I'm storm chasing, then I imagine that others are looking and applauding and, in some sense, giving me a kind of recognition which I so desire. So you might say a combination of the imaginary audience, I imagine others are looking at me, and again, the individual isn't necessarily conscious of this, and the personal fable, I'm invulnerable, would certainly lend itself to how individuals can block out a very real threat to their personal well-being.
So with the audience watching them, they want to succeed. I want to capture this tornado so that I can show my friends. It's almost like they're trying to be heroes.
Well, let's put it this way. The notion that they're trying to capture something so they can show it is very similar to what children do. Look what I've done, watch me mommy, watch me daddy. So we can see some residue of childlike or adolescent psychological disposition within the psychology of adults that pursue these novel and dangerous experiences.
Okay. At what point do you think that, now I know that you yourself are not a storm chaser, so you haven't gone through the type of preparation that they have in terms of studying the weather ahead of time and getting all the equipment right and whatnot. But how do people decide at what point that they have prepared themselves enough to give themselves the confidence to go out and do this sort of thing?
Well, by virtue of past experience, excuse me, by virtue of past experience. I prepared this way in the past and I was successful, I'll do it again. Plus, individuals compare with others as to what are the appropriate measures to take so that they're moving in a safety zone as opposed to reckless abandon. I think sometimes we misconstrue individuals that pursue dangerous novelty, meaning that they're reckless and they're merely seeking out novelty without adequate precaution. On the contrary, individuals that parachute jump as a recreation are very thorough in their preparation for that undertaking. So I would say, based on past experience, coupled with the fact that what others have done and have succeeded, I will do as well.
Okay. I've spoken to a couple of other people who, notably my subject's girlfriend, who doesn't think that this is such a good idea, him going out there risking his life and all that. These people who do risk their lives and safety to seek out novelty, I mean, I have an idea of what your answer is going to be, but I just kind of have to ask this for the sake of addressing it in my piece. But are they nuts? Are they mentally ill, or is
the individuals who
go out and seek the novelty?
Not in the least.
Okay.
Not in the least. We live in a society today in which sensation seeking is applauded, valued, encouraged. We present novel situations, maybe prematurely, to very young children. We have a sense of ourselves as masters of the universe. And given our technologies and the mastery that that has brought about in terms of our ability to control the environment, we may take that to a fault. It's not personal madness. It might be a socially induced madness. That we're born in a society which applauds novelty, and we rarely pick up the gauntlet and continue to run with it in that regard. As we master more and more novelty, our tendency to risk-take increases by virtue of the fact that we have been successful, we have been reinforced. There's nothing that I can't undertake. I know no boundaries. That's the expression I like to use. I know no boundaries. And we see that built into so many of our recreational pursuits. It's even in advertising. We know no boundaries. Whitewater rafting, for example, or taking a truck, Silverado up the mountain and down again. We really dramatize this element of we should not be intimidated, but we can master, even at the risk of our own lives. But again, we don't dwell on the risk, so to speak, to our own lives. We assume that we can master and that we are capable and that we can exceed the boundaries of, reasonability or conservatism.
Sure. One last thing. Could you just give me maybe a simple dictionary definition of what a novelty is?
A novelty is any stimulus situation which departs from everyday or ordinary or typical experience.
Okay. That's pretty much all I wanted to ask you, but is there anything that you would like to add that I did not ask about?
Well, I think if we dwell on the notion that novelty creates excitement, and this excitement can be very gratifying and very pleasurable, but we know that excitement can also cross the threshold into feeling uneasy, worried, tense, and anxious. So much of it is interpretation. For example, what is stressful for one person may be exciting for another, which I'll add this. Hans Selye was an important stress researcher a number of years ago, and he talked about distress, which is disabling, and eustress, which is invigorating. So people that pursue novelty and derive pleasure are pursuing eustress, the stress that invigorates and excites them in a very positive way. But that depends on perception. Storm chasing for one may seem very dangerous, and for another, in Selye's terms, a source of eustress. On the other hand, the same experience can turn and become now distressful. So much of what we experience as novel and exciting or novel and threatening depends on our perception. And how we perceive depends on our conditioning.